Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the MindsetGo radio show. I'm your host, Mark Altman. Glad to be back here with you on a Thursday, and hope you're all having a wonderful day. You know, in our last show, we talked about decision-making, and today we're going to talk about apology. And we're going to talk about the sincerity that goes with apology, and we're going to talk about all the aspects that go with giving an apology, receiving an apology, what happens if your apology isn't accepted, what gets in the way of an apology, and the thought process that goes into making a sincere and genuine apology. So, hope you'll enjoy the show today. And, you know, I was thinking coming in, I looked up the definition, the pure definition of apology, and it is a regretful acknowledgement of an event and of an offense or failure. And what really jumped out to me about that definition is the word regretful. And I often discuss in my training, there's a lot of words in the English language that are really ambiguous. And I'm going to add regretful to the list because what might be regretful to you, it's all open to interpretation, right? These are words that are all open to interpretation. A word I often talk about is respect, integrity, regret, success, words that are open to interpretation. And so I might make an apology to you, and you might question the sincerity of the apology, but you don't necessarily know if I'm being sincere or not. And you're going to make that assessment based on my body language, based on my tone, based on my word choice. But I'm sure a lot of our listeners out there have been involved in a conversation where someone says, well, you don't even mean that. And that's the tricky thing about apology. It's that the intent and the true regret in the apology is up for debate in many cases. And I remember when I was a teenager, even in my 20-something, you know, we would talk about the death penalty. And I remember, 25 years ago, the death penalty, which was a much bigger issue than it is now. And I used to say to people, and I'm not a politically charged person by any stretch, but I used to say to people, how would you feel about the death penalty if it was your own family member that died? And would you think if you didn't believe in the death penalty, would you think any differently? And when I think about things you could have to apologize for, there's certainly everyday things in your personal life. Maybe your child does something wrong, they break something. Maybe your spouse does something wrong. But then I think about professionally some of the things that could cause you to say, I'm sorry, and maybe not just could cause you, but are probably the most common areas where people are saying sorry professionally. One of them is lack of integrity or follow through. You say you're going to do something, but your actions don't support it, and you put yourself in a situation where you need to apologize. Second, in customer service, you could give poor service to a client or do something you're not supposed to, which warrants a sorry. And I have to tell you, one of my biggest pet peeves in customer service is when you're talking to someone and they're in a position to apologize and they say sorry repeatedly. Because in my mind, once someone says sorry more than once, they're really basically saying that they don't have a way they can really help you or correct the situation beyond saying sorry. So anytime you hear a customer service person repeat sorry, heads up, they probably can't help you. A third area you see professionally, people are broken promises. Whether it's a promise of a promotion, whether it's a salary increase, whether it's an opportunity to do something professionally, but it's some kind of broken promise. And let's face it, when we talk about apology, if you're a leader and executive listening to the show today, and you might be sitting there thinking to yourself, well, geez, how would this play into my role? Well, all of these things we're talking about so far, lack of follow-through, poor service, broken promises, not listening or prioritizing, that is totally going to infect the culture of your workplace. It's going to affect the productivity in your workplace and how often or how consistently your employees are engaged are a direct result of the things I just mentioned. So it very much relates. So those are all the things we say sorry for personally and professionally. But then it's the highest level of all, what I was talking to earlier. How do you say sorry for committing murder? How do you say sorry for committing adultery? How do you say sorry for stealing something from someone? I mean, those are 3 of the 10 commandments, and that is in its own hierarchy level of saying sorry. So I thought it would make sense to let's first explore, I define what an apology is, but what is it supposed to do, right? It's supposed to show remorse. It's supposed to acknowledge the hurt that your actions have caused someone else. And that's a very interesting sentence, right? Because for that to be authentic and genuine, you have to be right. So how do you truly understand the hurt that your actions have caused someone else? You can assume, based on the reaction, they are hurt, but you don't really necessarily know why it hurt them. And so much of what I talk about when we do training at companies, whether it be team building or leadership or engagement or sales or whatever, is we talk about focusing on asking questions and listening more so than talking. And so this phrase, acknowledge the hurt that your actions have caused, is you don't really know. So the right approach there would be to actually ask, how did I hurt you? Now, it might sound condescending because sometimes it might be intuitive and obvious, but if you're not 100% sure, you can either say how you think it hurt them, but ask to confirm, or you could just come right out and say, look, I'm sorry I did this. Let me know how it affected you. Whether it's your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts, but that's an important sentence. You cannot assume. You can assume that they were hurt, but you can't necessarily know how they were hurt. And look, the big thing here is there are going to be mistakes. And I think there's a lot of people out there who have very high standards and expectations of themselves, including me. People call themselves perfectionists. And I find that when people call themselves a perfectionist, they wear it with a badge of honor, saying, hey, I'm a perfectionist, as if I should have an additional respect because of your drive to be perfect. Well, I don't think being a perfectionist is a good thing. I've learned that over the years because being a perfectionist has some consequences and side effects in its own, whether it be stress, whether it be coping with disappointment, whether it's your inner voice telling you you're not good enough. But that perfectionist role isn't good enough. So we are going to make mistakes. And it's not so much making the mistake, it's the problem. It's once you make the mistake, the key is how do you restore trust, confidence, and balance in that relationship when you've done something wrong? Because that's the whole thing about apology, is you have very potentially violated someone's trust. And restoring that and restoring their confidence in you. And by the way, I see this a lot in leaders when it comes to delegation. Because when leaders are able to be less controlling and delegate responsibility, they're testing you, right? And they're giving you the shot. And so when you don't deliver, when they trust that they can delegate certain responsibilities to you, then how do you restore that trust and confidence? Because they gave you a shot and you didn't deliver. So that's why that apology, it's not just important to make it, it's important that what your intent and what your choice is to how they can now feel confident that you can deliver if they give you another shot. And I got to be honest, I think one of our biggest challenges when it comes to apology is when people apologize, you do believe it's genuine and authentic. You believe the regret was there, but then they repeat the same mistakes again. Because what do you do with that? What do you do with someone who genuinely apologizes but isn't genuinely committed to changing the behavior? Again, that's my definition of integrity. Your actions have to match your words. So just because you're genuine and you're sorry, if your actions don't support that genuine behavior, then where are we? And as a matter of fact, we just talked about restoring trust and confidence. And by genuinely apologizing and then not having the actions follow the words, it can do more damage than good. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about why the apology will benefit you in the short and long term, and also the consequences of not apologizing. Welcome back to the show, and this is the Mindset Go Radio Show. We're talking about apologies and sincerity and how to really deliver authentic and genuine and meaningful, purposeful apologies. So why apologize, right? Because we do go through a process in our head of thinking, should I, shouldn't I, what does it mean? So there's an assumption, right, that if you've hurt someone unnecessarily or made a mistake, you're going to apologize, right? So that just seems somewhat obvious or intuitive. So here's the thing about the benefits of an apology, right? So it opens up a dialogue between yourself and the other person. And a lot of times when we make mistakes or when we apologize or when we're accountable for our behavior, we think it shows weakness. We think it shows a vulnerability. But I think if you talk to most human beings, they would tell you that your willingness to admit a mistake, share your feelings, try to learn more about how you hurt the other person, and more importantly, how you can avoid doing it with them in the future is powerful. And it makes you look like a more complete individual as opposed to a weak individual. You're also acknowledging that something you did was unacceptable. And that's hard, right? Because to admit failure and to admit you did something wrong can be tough internally. But the ability to rebuild trust and establish a relationship with that person gives you a chance to not only discuss what is and isn't acceptable for them, but also what is and isn't acceptable for you. Because the thing about apology is it often paves the way for deeper conversations where you can use empathy, you can strengthen your connection, and you can find more things you can relate to with that individual. So it's really an opportunity to enhance your relationship with the person. And what's interesting about that is a lot of times when we're deciding whether to say sorry or not, we often decide, we make a value judgment on how important the relationship is. Well, this isn't someone I'm going to see again, so it's not really important, I apologize. Or this is someone I don't really care if they like me or not, so this isn't important if I apologize. So that's something we need to think about, because if you're trying to form a habit, if you're trying to be consistent with your behavior, then you're doing the apology regardless of the value you see in the person or not. And so that's a really important distinction to make, because everything we're trying to teach people at Mindset Go is to form habits or behaviors so you can have a personal template to know what's right and wrong. Because the second you're second guessing yourself, and the second you're saying, well, for this person I'll do it and this person I won't, then you start to rationalize your behavior and rationalize your decision making, and that's not where you want to be. One of the other things is when you do something wrong, it hurts yourself, right? It affects your dignity. It affects your self-confidence. It affects your ability to often make good decisions. So when an apology takes place, so much of the onus and emphasis is on the other person healing and the other person forgiving. But there's also a real element of healing and forgiving yourself when you harm other people. You know, I often talk about with accountability, this concept of doing something on accident or on purpose. And I've explained in the past shows, we've talked about this middle category called negligence. And so when it comes to making an apology, there's an assumption often by the person who committed the act that if it was an accident, that they deserve a given forgiveness. And I don't believe that's true. I think everybody deserves forgiveness. But the whole thing about doing something on accident, if you could have prevented the accident, then to me that's negligence. If it was truly an accident, then it's an accident. But this ability to forgive yourself, if you do it by accident, you might be hard on yourself. If you were negligent, you might be hard on yourself. If it was on purpose, it was very likely some kind of passive-aggressive or just aggressive behavior. But the key here is that if it was negligent or by accident, there could be some healing you need to do with yourself. And one of the things I see a lot of times with young adults, and I don't care whether it's a high school student, a college student, a recent graduate, there's this concept of taking responsibility for your actions. And in the short term, you feel a sense of relief, right? Because you stopped carrying this big weight around, whether internally or externally, you came clean and you moved past it. But it's the long-term benefit of building character and building behavior that's really significant. And one of the funny things about this is I give this example when I talk with college students. I give this example that, let's say you're in a situation where you didn't turn in an assignment on time, and you get a bad grade, and you go talk to and you feel you were unjustly treated, even though you didn't turn in the assignment on time. So when that college professor looks at you and says, "What happened?" The tendency when someone says what happened is to make an excuse, is to justify what you did wrong, so the other person will then empathize or sympathize with you, right? That's the pattern of behavior. And what I tell college students to do is the opposite. I tell them that when they're asked what happens, to be accountable by saying what happened was, I didn't manage my time properly. Because that's usually what happened. Whether it was a time management issue, whether it was a prioritization, they were out partying, they prioritized other work, they prioritized other extracurricular activities or organizations. They didn't manage their time properly. And I said, what do you think a professor, what do you think a teacher, what do you think a boss would say if the person just right out of the gate said, it's on me, I didn't manage my time properly? I believe people would be much more sympathetic and empathetic when you take that accountability and you take that responsibility, because what you're actually doing is you're shifting the focus. Because most people are expecting an excuse. Most people are expecting a defense and a justification for your actions. So you're distracting them from what they expected, and you're getting them to be open-minded to a new thought process. So I really think that's a key point. When you take responsibility and you take accountability, you can distract people from the perception of what they're expecting to hear, and really it can work towards you. Look, these words, I'm sorry, are probably two of the most powerful words in the English language. And if your sole motive for apologizing is just to do right by the other person, you're missing it. You're missing it. It's serving you as well. It's bestowing your own self-respect. It's bestowing integrity. It's bestowing a sense of responsibility and maturity, and understanding how your behavior affects others and yourself is critical. And here's a point I want to make before we go into our next break. I talked in the previous segment, okay, about the fact of understanding how you restore trust and confidence in an individual. So if you don't realize that when you apologize, how it directly affects you, even in the short term, if you don't buy into the concept of how it affects you, your health, your physical, mental, emotional health, remember this, that if you're not able to restore confidence and trust and have that person feel that way about you, that in itself will affect you, because their confidence in you and their willingness to work with you moving forward in any capacity will be affected. They'll disconnect from you, they'll disengage from you, and then you'll start to wonder a month or two later what's going on, and you probably won't remember that the cause of this was actually back when you didn't apologize genuinely or didn't apologize at all, and remember that that's where the trust and confidence started to erode. So there are multiple benefits. And when we come back for our next segment, we're going to talk about really why apologies are so difficult. It would seem like, right, why can't we do it? We've already talked about the fear and the vulnerability and the weakness, but we're going to get into much more depth of why those apologies are difficult. I'm Mark Altman. This is the Mindset Go radio show. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to the show, and we're talking about apologies, and so far we've discussed the benefits of making those apologies and what really constitutes an apology. And now we're going to talk about why apologies are so difficult. And it reminds me of a scene from the old movie with Rodney Dangerfield, Back to School. And rest in peace, former comedian Sam Kinison. I remember he was in that classroom, and he was trying to get a student to say something, and he was screaming, "Say it," in their face. So for those of you who remember that movie, I'm sure you'll get a chuckle thinking about that. But, say it, say it, say it. Well, that's what apologies are like. For so many people, actually saying those words are just so sorry. And, we talked about in the last segment how it could be a sign of weakness, but really seeing it as a sign of strength. And there's a certain kind of intelligence called AQ, and that stands for adversity quotient. And adversity really gives you an opportunity to show your true colors. It's when you're so confident and self-aware in yourself and in the respect and trust people have for you that you can apologize. And it becomes seamless because of your adversity quotient. And think about it. When you get married, they say richer or poorer, sickness and health. What are they talking about? They're talking about how well you deal with adversity. And so that's the interesting thing about apology. So much of what we do and how we process information and how we communicate information is based on our mindset. So if we look at an apology as an opportunity to show our emotional and mental toughness and how we deal with adversity and see it as a sign of strength, it almost becomes easier to do. It should become easier to do. But if we see it as a sign of weakness, that's where it starts. And really what happens is it becomes threatening. It becomes threatening to your character because you must be a bad person. If you were neglectful, that just must be who you are. You must be selfish or uncaring. If you were wrong, you must be ignorant or stupid. So it really is a threat to your identity and self-esteem. And that's just it, right? Because if you see it as a reflection of your permanent character, then that can really be discouraging, because if this is how people are going to think of you, right, then you're not going to want to say it. And what's interesting about this is when I say reflection of your permanent character, think about for a moment who you are. If you don't know your core values, if you don't have an identity, if you don't have a self-esteem, then it will be a reflection of your character because you don't have a template to base it off of. Even whether it's true or untrue, that's the message you will tell yourself. So from a mindset perspective, if you see it as a reflection of your permanent character, that can be very discouraging to say, I'm sorry. If you don't, it can be rewarding to say, I'm sorry. So that absolutely is a mindset issue. Now, we know this word, it's a dirty word, and it's guilt, right? So apologizing now can open the door to guilt. But if you don't apologize, it can exacerbate the problem and now extend to shame. And guilt certainly makes us feel bad about our actions. But shame, the difference here is that shame makes us feel bad about ourselves. So choosing to apologize genuinely or not apologizing at all is the difference between feeling bad about our actions and feeling bad about ourselves. And here's the thing. I can honestly tell you, in many cases, I want you to feel bad about your actions Because that's what regret and remorse is. I don't want you to feel anxious. I don't want you to walk on eggshells. But if you did something to wrong me, I want you to think about it. Because that remorse and regret ideally is going to motivate you to not only not repeat the action, but it's going to motivate you to prioritize in your head and being mindful to not do it again. So guilt isn't a bad thing. Do I enjoy feeling guilt? No, absolutely not. And I don't want to give that impression at all. But it can be tough. It can be tough. And again, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it throughout the show. It's a mindset. So if you look at an apology as I don't want to feel guilt versus I don't want to feel shame, so I'm going to apologize because I'd rather feel guilt than shame. And if guilt is driving me to have a more positive, consistent behavior, mindset, and being mindful not to repeat the act, then I'll take guilt all day long. So again, that's a mindset thing. Now, what's interesting is one of the hopes of the apologist is that you're going to resolve a conflict. And I see a lot of companies out there offering conflict resolution services. And don't get me wrong, they're incredibly valuable. But a big part of how I teach conflict resolution is conflict prevention. I'm trying to teach the communication strategies and techniques so the conflicts can be non-existent or at least significantly minimized, right? So when we're thinking about resolving interpersonal conflict, right? Here's something that gets very hidden when we think of an apology. An apology, for the people who don't want to apologize, they'll rationalize that once you make the apology, it can open up a door to further accusations and conflict. Because once you've admitted that vulnerability, once you've been accountable and come clean, now the person who's receiving the apology says, oh, well, this explains what happened back then. And boy, there's a pattern and there's a precedent. And the fact of the matter is, there might be. So if you're debating whether or not to apologize and your rationale for it is because you could think you could open the door to further accusations and conflict, you better ask yourself an important question is, if you did open the door, is it the truth? Maybe that self-awareness is what you need. And believe me, I'm not arguing that if you had that self-awareness and you thought those further accusations or conflict could be justified, that's good to hear and it's going to make you feel better. But let me tell you, self-awareness is really powerful, and that's such a huge aspect of emotional intelligence. So that's a big part. Now, it could be that you make the apology and the receiver of the apology creates rationalizations around further accusations and conflict that aren't true. But the point I made earlier is you can't control other people. If you're trying to form the habits, if you're trying to form the behaviors, then the way you do that is by being consistent and knowing that if some of these things happen, you can't control it, but that shouldn't dictate whether you do it or don't do it. Now, one of the tricky things about apology also, when it comes to why it can be discouraging, is because when you make an apology, there's an assumption that means you were fully responsible. And to make an analogy, I often hear when leaders are put in a position to give and receive feedback from people, that when they hear an idea that they don't agree with or doesn't even sound rational, that by validating someone's thoughts, it means they agree with it. It doesn't. If you tell someone, I see what you're saying, or I can understand why you would think that way, you're not agreeing, you're just validating what they're saying. And when you apologize, you're not assuming full responsibility. The expression, it takes two to tango, is quite relevant here. So think about that. Think about where that goes. And if you do think the other person should be responsible, and if you're debating whether or not to apologize because you think the other person needs to apologize for that too, maybe they do. Maybe they had the role. In many cases, they probably will have the role. But if you're deciding whether or not to make an apology based on whether you think the other person's going to also make the apology, don't do it. Apologize for your role in the situation. Apologize for your accountability and involvement in the situation. And if the other person apologizes too, great. If they don't, at least you can feel mentally, physically, and emotionally more sound because you did your part. And lastly, there's an assumption that the non-apologist, by non-apologizing, they're managing their emotions. That they've convinced themselves, they've internalized a thought process that they're comfortable with anger. They can deal with emotional distance. That vulnerability is extremely threatening. That once you lower your guard, once you show people your true colors, and I'm being sarcastic, your true colors meaning that you take accountability, you're responsible, and you want to maintain that trust and connection with human beings. Where do you go from there? Because if you let your guard down, these non-apologists have convinced themselves that it's a really significant issue. And you know what? You're talking now on a therapeutic level, because it could be. Because if your self-esteem and confidence is so much that you feel like that is threatening, that could affect your emotional, mental, and physical health. But that's where it might be helpful to talk to someone, whether it be a mentor or a therapist or someone, to really understand how it would affect you. Because if you think that anger, irritability, and emotional distance are the way to go, they're not. But at the stage you're at in your life, they might be where you need to be to cope and live every day. When we come back, when we get to the final segment of our show today, we're going to talk about when saying sorry. We've talked so much about having the confidence and comfort to apologize, but when we come back, we're going to talk about when you say sorry and it isn't enough. This has been Mark Altman, the Mindset Go radio show. We'll be right back. Welcome back for our final segment of the Mindset Go radio show. I'm your host, Mark Altman, founder and CEO of Mindset Go. And at Mindset Go, our focus so much, and one of the reasons this topic of apology is so passionate, I'm so passionate about, is we talk about emotional intelligence, conversational intelligence, and multi-generational intelligence. And this topic of apologizing and saying I'm sorry is at the heart of emotional intelligence and conversational intelligence. In an indirect way, multi-generational intelligence. So, one of the things I think that really gets lost in saying I'm sorry is, we talked earlier about the whole concept of on accident, on purpose, or my category, the middle category of negligence. But here's the ultimate thing about apologies and mistakes. It's that it's not the intention. It's the impact that the act caused. So when someone says, I did it by accident, they're saying their intent was not to do it. And that may or may not be true. But it's the impact of their mistake that we need to focus on. And if we don't repair breaks in our relationship, and if we feel like we can sweep things under the rug, then and we don't care about the impact, and we're not focusing on the impact it's having, that in itself is the hardest part. So what makes you what do you do? If you're going to make a true apology, how do you do it, right? Well, first of all, you got to tell them how you feel. It's the words, I'm sorry, right? That's simple enough. Aaron Lazar has a good book on apology that he's written. I highly recommend it. And he talks about really expressing that remorse. And so here's an example he cites. He says, I'm so sorry and sad to hear that my lack of communication has made you so angry and resentful. I'm sorry and embarrassed that my comment caused such an uproar. So he talks about, listen to those words. He talks about, first, you say you're sorry. Second, you express the emotion you're feeling at the consequence this caused the other person. You're stating what it is you thought you did that caused the problem. And you're anticipating the emotions that they felt if they haven't already communicated them. So those are all those parts in telling them what you feel. So you don't just say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, those two words are not enough. And as I said before, if you make assumptions, what you did and how you made them feel, you're taking a risk to make it worse. So I would recommend, I like Dr. Lazar's idea. I would just recommend that you get some what I call communication confirmation to make sure that the assumptions you're making, no matter how accurate you think they are confirmed. Now, the key when you're making this apology is you don't know how it's going to be received. You have no idea. So if you go into the apology with an expectation that they're going to hug you, forgive you on the spot, don't bother. Because I keep saying that it's your habit, it's your behavior. You cannot do things predicated on the expected results you're going to get from the other person. So do what you know is right, do it the right way without an expectation, because otherwise it's going to distract you, because once they don't react the way you want them to react, it's going to distract you and it's going to affect your ability to be emotional intelligent. And all the remorse and all the empathy and all the disappointment and guilt you were feeling is going to now turn into anger and frustration, because it was hard enough for you to make that apology, to do what you needed to do, and now you did it, and this is what you get? That's the mindset. That's the thought process at that point, and that doesn't work. And then all the hard work you had to do, and let me tell you, it is hard work. It takes a lot of courage and confidence to do that. And all the hard work you did to get to that point goes for naught if you become distracted by the expectations you have of them accepting your apology. Now, part of that apology was admitting your mistake and the negative impact it had, right? So we talked about, in reading that example, your mistake was lack of communication. Your mistake was an inappropriate comment. The impact it had was they became angry and resentful. The impact the second one has, it caused an uproar. It's very important to make the admittance of the specific mistake and understanding the impact it had on the person, on the situation, on the company, on the team, you name it. It's important to know all those things and acknowledge all those things. Now, here's the thing. Making the situation right. So my thing, I talked earlier about when you repeat the same mistake over and over and keep apologizing and then the actions don't match the words. How do you make a situation right? We see in customer service professionally a lot, someone I call it a make good, and they'll give you a gift certificate to something, or they'll do some kind of, give you a discount, or they'll give you something free the next time you do business with them. You know what's funny? I find a lot of people, when they do that, they're assuming they know what you want to feel better. And a lot of times people give things away unnecessarily. And they give them away because they don't know how to apologize and say sorry the right way. I don't need anything from you. I don't need you to, the way you make it right is by telling me how you're going to prevent the mistake next time. That's what I want to know. Are you going to put a new process in place? Are you going to have a team meeting to discuss what went wrong with this one employee so other people become aware of the problem and know to not let it happen to another customer? And by the way, I don't even need there to be consequences necessarily. I'm not necessarily looking for someone to be fired. I'm not looking for someone to be written up. I just want to know what steps you're going to take, what process you're going to use to either prevent the mistake from happening or significantly reduce the chances of it happening again. So if my son comes home and says, "Hey, Dad, sorry, I forgot to do the dishes." Okay. Well, how are you going to remember to do them next time? I don't know. Well, are you going to leave a note? Are you going to put a reminder in your phone? Are you going to incorporate it into your daily routine? Are you going to put a note in the kitchen, the refrigerator, so when you open the refrigerator, you see it? That's going to mean something to me. Because I assure you, for every parent listening out there, how confident when someone doesn't do their chores or someone doesn't do something around their house and they say, oh, sorry, next time I'll do it. Are you really that confident it's going to be all that different next time? Because I bet you're not. And so that's the whole thing. When you make a situation right, it's not always about money or a discount or some kind of gift. It's about the tone. It's about the word choice. It's about the authenticity. And it's about what you are going to do differently next time. And I think when it comes to apologies, that is where people struggle most because they don't know how to change the habit. They don't know how to do it differently. They don't know how to make it right. So we as leaders and we as people in position of authority, instead of assuming people will know how to make it right, instead of expecting them to make it right, we need to understand how they're going to make it right. We need to develop that critical thinking skill so they can start offering those things up without our prompting. Because how great would it be if an employee walked into your office and said, hey, look, here's what happened. And look, I'm so tired in the workplace. We spend so much time saying, well, why did this happen? Or how did this happen? Well, the why is helpful because we can figure out what to do next differently. But instead of focusing so much on the emphasis on blame and making sure we know who did it, and it is important to know that, but so much more of the focus should be on how can we prevent this in the future? How can we make it right? And that is really, really essential when it comes to understanding apology. So next week, when we come back, we're going to continue this discussion. We're going to talk about how it's never too late to make apologies. We're going to talk about how to accept an apology. And we're going to talk about what can go wrong if an apology isn't accepted. So thank you so much for joining us this week. This has been the Mindset Go Radio Show. I'm Mark Altman. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week and weekend.